think we're just going to wait one more minute. Welcome everyone to the Alliance's annual federal budget briefing. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am Jamie Coleman and I do federal advocacy work with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'll be joined today by other Alliance staff including Julie Klein, Policy Outreach Associate, Steve Berg, our Vice President for Programs and Policy, Sharon McDonald, Director for Families and Youth, and our Program and Policy Analysts Mindy Mitchell, Noelle Porter, Jamie Day, and Catherine Monet. In this webinar, we are going to talk about the President's fiscal year 2017 budget request, which was released on Tuesday. Before we delve into the content of the budget, though, I'd like to point out that in case you would prefer to follow along throughout the webinar using a printed version of the webinar slides, you can access them by following the link on our President's FY 2017 budget briefing page, which is currently on the screen. In addition to the slides, you can also find a number of helpful materials, including our FY 2017 budget chart and rundown, and a link to our FY 2017 homelessness funding campaign. Please note that all of the lines will be muted during the briefing, but if you have questions at any point, you can send them to us through the webinar. To do so, you'll find a box labeled questions in the webinar panel at the right side of your screen that you can type your questions into, and we'll go over as many as possible at the end. If you're having technical difficulties during the webinar, I would recommend calling in by phone instead of using your computer's speakers. If there are any additional issues, please quit and restart the webinar. The purpose of today's briefing is to learn what's in the new budget proposal, how it impacts affordable housing and homelessness, and how we can use this as a foundation to work together to advance some key issues this year. Julie is going to start things off with providing a brief overview of the federal budget and appropriations process. Next, my colleagues will give a rundown of the President's FY 2017 budget proposal for key departments and programs. Steve will then discuss the budget and policy outlook for this year. And lastly, Julie will explain how you can get involved in preventing and ending homelessness throughout our FY 2017 homelessness funding campaign. As you can see, there's so much to cover in an hour. We promise to get to as many questions as possible. Okay, now I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Julie Klein, who will give us an overview of the federal budget and appropriations process.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome, everyone. And we just want to apologize for our technical difficulties. We're glad to have so many of you on. As Jamie said, today I'm going to start off by giving a quick overview of key points of the federal budget process for advocates to be aware of and providing some background information on the President's budget proposal and where this fits into that larger process. So the President's budget proposal was released by the White House's Office of Management and Budget this past Tuesday, February 9th. It typically marks the start of the federal budget and appropriations process for the next fiscal year and kicks off the rest of the process. So this budget request is to fund the federal government during fiscal year 2017, which will begin on October 1st, 2016, and run until September 30th, 2017. The President's budget reflects the administration's funding priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. It is not law, but it is rather meant to guide the House and Senate as they make decisions about their proposed budgets and funding levels for programs during the appropriations process. All right, so last year, sorry for the technical difficulties again. All right, so this typically, the House and Senate will hold hearings after the budget is released to examine the administration's requests and then come up with a budget resolution that sets top-line spending for the year. However, we don't need to go through all of kind of the textbook civics lessons of this year, because this year the budget top-line spending level is already set through a budget agreement that sets this overall discretionary spending level for the upcoming year, as well as FY16, which is already enacted. So there is some talk of the Budget Committee in the House revisiting the top-line amounts. We'll see where that goes, hopefully not too far. We hope the Appropriations Committee will proceed with the current level. So what is more important to know this year is what this funding process is going to look like going forward and which congressional decision points advocates should look out for. All right, so something that is really important to understand before I continue, though, is the difference between discretionary and mandatory spending and the different processes for passing legislation setting each type of these spending provisions. All right, so discretionary spending makes up roughly a third of the federal budget, and it's determined by Congress on an annual basis through the appropriations process. Mandatory spending, on the other hand, makes up more than half of the total federal budget spending pie, if you will. It's authorized by Congress by setting eligibility or other criteria that must be followed each year. And once authorized, spending for the program is ongoing until that authorization runs out. It does not have to be, reapproved each year like discretionary spending. So an example of this for a program on the mandatory side is Medicare. Another would be TANF. A simplified but handy way that I like to remember the difference between discretionary and mandatory spending is that Congress is able to use more discretion each year to determine discretionary spending levels, whereas once mandatory programs pass, and are signed into law, the funding to carry those programs out is better locked in to roll over each year until the authorization ends, i.e. more mandatory. In the President's budget proposal, recommendations for mandatory programs typically suggest changes to eligibility criteria and individual benefits, but in the President's budget, there usually are not specific funding levels suggested. However, in part this year, due to the already agreed upon top-line budget cap that I mentioned that limits the amount of discretionary spending available, and the Obama administration really following through on their commitment and writing a budget to that negotiated cap. This budget includes many proposals on the mandatory side where there is a bit more wiggle room to play with than the really tight spending cap set on the discretionary side. The catch, though, on the mandatory side is that in order to propose an increase in mandatory spending, rules known as pay-go rules dictate that the increases must be offset by savings from existing funds or revenue increases. So the administration in this budget largely balances its mandatory spending requests by making cuts to other mandatory programs and projecting increased tax revenues. And this has sparked some pretty intense criticism already from fiscal conservatives. All right, so enough about mandatory versus discretionary spending. Let's talk about some of the key points in the appropriations process that impact discretionary spending. So that, again, is on the appropriation side, the side that gets redetermined each year. Like I said, the top line spending level for the federal government, also known as a 302A allocation, has already been set in negotiations that lifted sequestration caps. So the next step will be for the full appropriations committee in each chamber to figure out how this will be divvied up between the 12 appropriations subcommittees. And then once divvied up, these overall spending levels for each of the appropriations subcommittees will be known as 302B allocations. This is a great point in the process for advocates to get involved, and we'll be coming back to opportunities to get involved in 2016 later. All right, so once members who sit on the appropriations subcommittees find out the spending allocations their subcommittee has to work with, they and their staff work to determine funding levels for individual programs that fall under their committee's jurisdiction. So for example, as many of you are familiar with, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, or THUD subcommittee is charged with funding programs including the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grants Program, Housing Choice Vouchers, and other federal housing programs. And it's divvied up in such a way and down to such a really specific level because it's impossible for anyone on the Appropriations Committee to have a solid grasp of all of the programs in the federal government. So splitting the full committee into subcommittees allows members to focus on a specific group of programs over which they have jurisdiction. This is another great point in the federal funding process to get involved, and again, there'll be more on influencing appropriations for specific program funding levels later on in the webinar. Then later in the spring, the appropriations subcommittees and committees mark up their bills in the House and then the Senate, and ideally each chamber, the bill would pass out of each of the 12 appropriations bills would pass through each chamber, and then they'd be reconciled through a conferencing process before a final vote in each chamber and then being signed into law by the president. So again, that's ideally. However, in such a partisan political environment, it has been difficult to get bills through that regular appropriations process. So in recent years, the process has halted partway through when the federal government has relied on either broad budget deals and large omnibus appropriations packages to come to agreements on funding levels to keep the government running. All right, so for those of you who have been involved in our past advocacy efforts to increase funding for targeted homelessness programs, the above process to impact these appropriations annually likely sounds very, very familiar. For each of the mandatory proposals that my colleagues will be speaking to shortly, just keep in mind that each of these would require a new bill that has its own process that is different from this appropriations process. It might be less familiar, and we thought about kind of running through that entire process, but we know what you all really want to hear is what's in the budget. So we'll have more to say about how you can plug in to that in the upcoming weeks as we move forward with proposals. All right, so to return to the role of the President's budget proposal, again, it's not law, but rather it's a guide. Congress ultimately makes the decisions about what goes into the bills. So since we have a Republican majority in both chambers, the President's budget proposal coming to fruition will really depend, on how Congress decides to distribute limited, non-discretionary non-defense discretionary funding and the extent to which it incorporates the administration's priorities and how it decides how to distribute this spending. In this tough budget environment, there are many, many interests vying for member support for their priorities, so it's really critical that advocates really strongly make the case to their members of Congress that investments and initiatives included in this budget proposal for the purpose of ending homelessness are really worth funding. So this is why you are so critical to the federal funding process. Senators and representatives rely on you for information about funding for housing and homelessness programs. They are definitely more likely to push for funding increases when they understand and the direct impact that the funding has on real programs and people in their states and districts. The President's budget proposal kicks off the start, again, of the federal funding process, and we really appreciate the past dedication to such efforts from our local partners and really want to make sure we continue and expand all the excellent work from our field as we move forward into the FY 2017 funding cycle this year. It's certainly worth repeating that we can't impact funding levels for key homelessness and affordable housing programs without the help of advocates across the country all pitching in to make a really strong collective impact like we really did for FY 2016. So thank you all. So now with that, I'm going to hand this over to Steve to share what you're all waiting to hear about, what the Alliance thinks about this budget overall, and a broad strokes introduction to what's in the administration's proposal.
All right, thanks, Julie. And thank you to everybody, the hundreds of people who are on this call today, for your interest in this. And we're going to spend the next 25 minutes or so going over some of what's in the budget that's the most relevant to people who are working to end homelessness. And then we'll talk about, at the end, about how people can have an impact on this. So to start, the big picture, this is a very aggressive budget by President Obama and his administration, and probably the most aggressive that they've put out in his time in office in terms of really taking on issues of poverty, issues of inequality. The housing is at the center of that, and programs dealing with housing stability and particularly homelessness are among the ones that have really been featured. A truly breathtaking proposal is the proposal to put $11 billion on the table to fund permanent housing vouchers and rapid rehousing for homeless families with children. There are a number of other things. As Julie said, these are mandatory spending programs, which means these programs don't exist. In order for them to actually be funded, there would have to be new bills introduced, new legislation passed through a whole separate process. None of that has even started yet. We are working to develop strategies to make as much of that happen as we can. We hope people will stay tuned over the next couple of weeks as those strategies unfold, as we work with the administration to make that happen. In the meantime, one thing that is happening, and is happening right now, is the beginning of the annual appropriations process. This is the usual way that HUD programs get funded to do what Julie told people about: discretionary funding programs, the existing programs, and what levels of funding they're going to get through the appropriation process. And it's important to note a lot of the attention has been on some of the larger mandatory spending proposals, but this budget also makes very strong proposals to increase discretionary funding through the existing programs. So we'll get into details in a minute. The overview on this: HUD, of course, is proposed for a fairly large increase. Most of that is to cover the increased costs of existing capacity. Rents are going up, and many of the HUD programs, like Section 8, are market-based programs. So when the housing market gets more expensive, the costs go up. But a substantial amount of that is new programs for homeless people. So that's exciting. We'll hear about that. The VA, of course, continues to fund programs for homeless veterans, and it will be important to send the message that that work is not done. There are still communities that need those resources to house homeless veterans. Once all the homeless veterans are housed, resources will be needed to prevent homelessness from recurring. And then finally, the Health and Human Services DOL budgets. These have important roles to play in ending homelessness and making sure the broad support is available to provide a context where homelessness can be ended. So with that said, let me turn it back to Julie, who's going to go a little bit more in detail into what's in the budget proposal regarding the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Julie?
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. So we unfortunately don't have time to go through all of the hundreds of programs relevant to your work, but we have pulled out some of the key ones to give you a snapshot. I want to note that as we go through these programs, though, that if you go to our President's FY 2017 budget briefing page, which you'll find a link to at the right side of our website, and also through the webinar PowerPoint, you can find a budget chart that we have, and also a really helpful rundown that our policy team has put together in the past 2 days that includes funding levels and a brief analysis of what's in the budget proposal for all the programs we'll be speaking about, and many more that you won't hear of today. All right, so that said, I am going to spend a few minutes walking you through a few of the HUD programs in the proposal that are really important to ending homelessness. The first, as you might have guessed, is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grants Program. The President's budget proposes to provide $2.664 billion for homeless assistance This represents a $414 million, or over 18% increase over the enacted FY 2016 funding level. And this investment is really a tremendous show of support and really speaks to the really great work that you all are doing. This $2.664 billion would include at least $270 million for the Emergency Solutions Grants, or ESG program, and that's $20 million more than the current enacted level. The ESG program, it allows communities to continue to expand their rapid rehousing efforts, as well as address other emergency needs, including shelter, street outreach, and homelessness prevention and services. The McKinney account would also include at least $2.362 billion for Continuum of Care, or COC programs. And this amount would definitely meet the renewal demand, and it would also do some other really exciting things. It would create 25,500 units of permanent supportive housing to get us much closer to ending chronic homelessness. And as you can see on the slide that should have just showed up on your screens, there is a direct link to the increased investment in PSH, or permanent supportive housing, over time targeted to chronically homeless individuals, and the decrease in chronic homelessness. So if we're going to end chronic homelessness, it's really estimated that we need these additional 25,500 units from Congress to finish the job. So that's just to emphasize the importance of that. The President's proposal also notes that the McKinney program would fund 8,000 rapid rehousing interventions for families with children, although it is unclear how much of this is funded through the COC versus ESG account at this point from the text. The administration does, though, point out multiple times throughout the budget summary the evidence base and effectiveness of rapid rehousing and the need to invest and build on this intervention. So we really appreciated the administration's acknowledgement of the effectiveness of this intervention and investments in it. So that is another key investment, and you'll hear more from my colleague Sharon about further investments in this on the mandatory side later. Another thing we are excited about that is in the COC McKinney account would be up to $25 million of the COC funding would be used to implement projects to demonstrate how a comprehensive approach to serving homeless youth can dramatically end youth homelessness. This funding would allow HUD to expand its youth demonstration project work that you might have heard about beyond the 10 communities that will be the focus of the $33 million set aside for this purpose in the FY 2016 enacted budget that passed a few months back. All right, so that's all for now on McKinney. The budget also provides $20.854 billion for tenant-based rental assistance, also known as the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or Section 8. In addition to hefty increases to cover contract renewals and administrative fees, 811, Section 811 mainstream vouchers for people with disabilities are also renewed. And then also within this tenant-based rental assistance account, really the piece that we're most excited about is a request for $88 million to fund approximately 10,000 new housing choice vouchers targeted specifically for homeless families with children. And just so you can keep all of these exciting proposals straight, this is separate from and would complement the big proposal on the mandatory side of the budget that Steve mentioned and Sharon will continue to touch on later. And this $88 million investment in the 10,000 new housing choice vouchers for families on the discretionary side would also really help drive progress in ending family homelessness. All right, so in addition to that, the tenant-based rental assistance account, it also includes $15 million for a new housing choice voucher mobility counseling demonstration that would allow folks to move to and stay in higher opportunity neighborhoods, families in particular. And the budget notes that these funds will be distributed to about 10 regional housing program sites with participating PHAs or private nonprofits over a 3-year period to provide outreach to landlords, portability, coordination, security deposits, counseling to voucher recipients on the benefits of opportunity-rich, low-poverty neighborhoods, et cetera. And it also notes that not more than $3 million of the funds dedicated to the mobility counseling demo can be used for an evaluation of the demonstration. So I did want to note before moving on that this Housing Choice Voucher Mobility Counseling Demonstration Project is a piece of a larger theme throughout the President's budget, which is improving the ability of families to rent in safer neighborhoods with more jobs and better schools. For a relevant example, the budget also includes additional funding for PHAs to ensure they have sufficient resources to promote mobility and greater access to opportunity, in addition to, of course, covering fundamental functions like housing quality inspections and tenant income certifications. Remember, you can find plenty more details on these and other HUD programs in our budget rundown. And you can find that rundown on that link to the budget briefing page that you can see right now on your screen. All right, with that said, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Sharon McDonald to talk about the really, truly exciting investments that this budget proposal makes for ending family homelessness.
Great. Thank you very much, Julie. So first, there's a number of exciting initiatives in the President's budget, and I'll hit on the ones that I think are the most important for those working on behalf of homeless families. First, on the mandatory side, and again, just to reiterate what you've already heard, this means Congress has to pass legislation to create or to modify those programs. The big news is the Homeless Assistance to Families program, which was proposed in the HUD budget. This would provide $11 billion over 10 years to solve family homelessness through the provision of housing vouchers and rapid rehousing. The budget estimates that this program alone would help 550,000 families escape homelessness. We would estimate about 55,000 families a year. 80% of the resources would be used for vouchers and 20% for rapid rehousing. This is, as you've heard, a strong and bold proposal that recognizes that while many families who become homeless have a wide range of experiences and support needs, what is fundamental for all is help to regain housing. The HHS budget includes another exciting initiative to help vulnerable families, the Emergency Aid and Service Connection Initiative. This program would provide $2 billion over 5 years to fund, evaluate, and scale up innovative state and local strategies to help families facing an economic crisis. The evident design is not dissimilar to the framework of a rapid rehousing response. It recognizes that many economically vulnerable families are teetering on the edge of things just becoming much worse for them because they don't have the help on demand. And sometimes a little bit of financial assistance and connections to support services is what is needed to help them withstand or recover and stabilize following an economic jolt or temporary crisis. This brings me to the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. This program provides $16 billion a year to states to help low-income families improve their self-sufficiency and meet their basic needs. The budget calls for a number of reforms that would improve how this program currently works. Those proposals would require a greater share of the funds to be used to support families directly, improve employment support through increasing subsidized employment, and to evaluate states' performance on the program by how well it performs in reducing child poverty. The budget also includes a proposal to improve child welfare services so that high-need vulnerable families also have the support they need to successfully care for their children and minimize the need for child separation and foster care. So if I can turn to the next slide, please. So on the mandatory side, as you've heard, we have lots of good proposals to work with, and we're going to need a lot of your help as the year progresses to convince Congress that they should prioritize and pass these initiatives. But one thing that you've heard that Congress is getting ready to start working on immediately, and where we need to start focusing, is on the discretionary side. How much money each of the federal programs will get this year and what they will be tasked to accomplish. Here there is good news for families experiencing homelessness as well. As you've heard, the budget proposes 10,000 new dedicated housing vouchers for homeless children and families. As Julie mentioned, the administration is also seeking a $414 million increase for the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Program. This increase would provide, among other important initiatives, capacity to rehouse an estimated 8,000 families over the next fiscal year. So together, these two asks would expand capacity to rehouse 18,000 families in FY 2017. This new capacity, which builds on existing resources for rapid rehousing in McKinney-Vento, an action that localities are already taking to reallocate funds to rapid rehousing, means that we may be closing in on a day in which no family experiencing homelessness or fleeing domestic violence is ever denied access to shelter due to a lack of capacity, because we're scaling up the infrastructure we need to make sure that families who become homeless are quickly provided the support they need to return to permanent housing. So the budget also includes a number of proposals to support very low-income families with children, most of which can be seen in the chart that Julie's referenced. One that I will make note of is a significant expansion of child care resources, including $40 million for innovative pilots to help address child care challenges many families face. This would include families who may require child care on an emergency basis, for non-traditional work hours, or those living in rural areas. The budget includes a $434 million increase for Head Start, which is a valuable resource for meeting the developmental needs of young children experiencing homelessness, and a $15 million increase for the Homeless Children and Youth programs, which helps homeless and doubled up children, those living in double situations due to economic necessity, remain connected to school. So lots of good work for us to focus on both the mandatory and discretionary side. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mindy.
Thanks so much, Sharon. It's really exciting to hear about all the great things in the administration's budget for families because so many homeless parents are themselves young mothers, which means that benefits for homeless families are also benefits for homeless youth. And again, everybody, I'm Mindy Mitchell. I'm the Program Policy Analyst here at the Alliance, whose focus is youth homeless. And I'm so glad to be able to share more information with you all about how this proposed budget can benefit homeless youth. First of all, in addition to the $25 million set aside for homeless youth that Julie mentioned in the HUD-McKinney portion of the budget, we also have important increases in the other parts of the budget that affect homeless youth. So as you can see on the screen, for the Runaway and Homeless Youth programs within the Family and Youth Services Bureau at HHS, we have an increase of a little over $6 million, which includes $2.3 million for a demonstration project within the Basic Center program, which provides emergency shelter for homeless minors. And that demonstration will focus on prevention and early intervention strategies with families of homeless and at-risk youth. Since youth homelessness is rooted in family-related issues and most homeless youth exit basic centers back to family-focused strategies are, of course, vital to ensuring that youth homelessness is rare, brief, and one-time. And while street outreach is flat funded at $17 million again this year, there is also a $2 million increase for Runaway and Homeless Youth Transitional Living Programs and an additional $2 million request to build on the funds provided to HUD in the FY 2016 enacted budget to implement a national incidence and prevalence study of youth homelessness. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, can you go back? There are also, in addition to the increases in the RHY programs that I just covered, the proposed budget includes some important changes in other programs that affect the lives of youth experiencing homelessness or housing instability. First of all, and I don't think this got onto one of the slides, there is a statutory proposal in the HUD budget to expand the time limit on family unification vouchers for youth from 18 months to 5 years. These vouchers can be an important resource for youth aging out of foster care, but one of the barriers to implementing them more broadly has been the 18-month time limit, which can make FUP for Youth vouchers difficult to administer since most rentals leases are for 1 year. There also is, that number is not correct. It's an $80 million proposed increase for the education for homeless children and youth, which is a $15 million increase over the FY 2016 enacted level. And this will help ensure that homeless and unstably housed youth have access to education, even in the midst of housing crises. And next slide, please. Finally, the administration is requesting an increase of $3.2 million to expand assistance to domestic trafficking victims. These kinds of programs are especially important for young people experiencing homelessness because of their high levels of vulnerability to labor and sexual exploitation. So that's it for my portion of the webinar, but there are also great opportunities for youth experiencing homelessness in the Department of Labor budget. So now I will turn it up to my colleague Noelle Porter, who will be able to tell you more about that.
Hi, thank you, Mindy, so much. Again, my name is Noelle Porter, and I am a program and policy analyst here at the Alliance working in employment and healthcare issues. And we have a couple of exciting budget requests within the budget, specifically for the Department of Labor. First, the budget includes $50 million for the Department of Labor's Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, or HVRP. This is a $12 million increase over FY 2016, and the first ever request that includes a fully authorized funding level. HVRP programs provide reintegration for homeless veterans into meaningful employment through job placement, training, job development, career counseling, and resume preparation. The budget also proposes increased total funding for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, a reform of the federal workforce system which aims to provide increased employment and economic opportunity for job seekers, especially low-income and homeless job seekers. The proposed total funding is $2.848 billion, which is a $139 million increase over fiscal year 2016. This total includes $842 million for adult employment and training activities, an increase of $26 million over fiscal year 2016. And this funding is designated for grants to design and operate training and employment assistance programs for adults, including low-income individuals and public assistance recipients. This total also includes $1.324 billion for dislocated worker employment and training activities, which is an increase of $80 million over fiscal year 2016. And this amount is aimed at providing reemployment services and retraining assistance to individuals dislocated from their employment. The budget also includes $987 million for youth activities, an increase of $114 million over fiscal year 2016. And this funding provides grants to support a wide range of activities and services to prepare low-income youth for academic and employment success, including summer and year-round jobs. The program links academic and occupational learning with youth development activities. The total budget includes $1.755 billion for Job Corps, which is an increase of $66 million over the previous year. And Job Corps is primarily a residential training program for at-risk youth. Finally, this total budget includes $85 million for the Youth Build program, which is the same funding level as last year. And Youth Build provides academic training and occupational skills training to program participants. That's all for the employment budget roundup, and now I'm going to send it over to my colleague, Jamie, who will be talking about some of the healthcare and criminal justice issues involved in the budget.
Thanks, Noelle. As Noelle said, I'm going to cover the health programs under the Health and Human Services Department, and then also a program under the Department of Justice. So the news from Health and Human Services is overall pretty good in terms of health. Essentially, it's all-level funding. Under Health Resources and Services Administration, the Healthcare for the Homeless and the Ryan White HIV/AIDS programs are level funded. Under the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, the big news here is that Medicaid is continuing to expand. Medicaid expansion took effect January 1 of 2014, and since then 32 states have expanded. And what this means is that any individual making less than 138% of the federal poverty level is eligible for health insurance. And this is regardless of having a disability or a minor child or being blind. So this is good news for our homeless providers and persons experiencing homelessness. This particular budget proposes incentives for the remaining states to expand by offering to cover the full cost of expansion for the first 3 years, regardless of when the state expands. In addition to expansion, several capacity building opportunities have been in place for states to structure their Medicaid in order to pay for supportive services in permanent supportive housing. And this will be a huge help for us to end chronic homelessness. Finally, under HHS, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, has several programs. I'm going to focus on a few key ones. These programs have essentially been level funded. The PATH program at $65 million is level funded. Other homeless programs, including the CABI, GABI, and treatment programs, I'm not going to spell them out. It would take the rest of the presentation, so you can look those up in our budget worksheet. But these programs have a slight cut of $5 million, so they're proposed to be funded at $69 million. However, SAMHSA programs are funded over multiple years, so this shouldn't result in any cuts to existing programs. And then finally, the mental health and substance abuse block grants are also level funded. And these grant programs are vital for funding supportive services and can fill a lot of the gaps that Medicaid doesn't cover. So we're really supportive of these grants. And in addition to all of these discretionary grants, the budget proposes $500 million for mental health services as mandatory spending. So we're really excited about that proposal. And then finally, with the Department of Justice, the Second Chance Act, which provides services for persons re-entering from jails or prisons, which can be a risk factor for homelessness, has been proposed to increase 40% from $68 million to $95 million. And the budget proposes a lot of new programs and innovations around criminal justice reform, which is very exciting for us. So with that being said, I will now turn this over to Catherine Monet, who will cover veterans work.
Thanks, Jamie. So VA is different from a lot of federal agencies in that they go through a process for their budget called advance appropriations. Basically what this means for several of their accounts is that funding is provided a year in advance, and the administration can request to adjust the advance appropriation during the budget process for that fiscal year if needed. Very good. Next slide. You're on top of it. This means that VA's FY17 budget request contains any requested adjustments to the FY17 advance appropriation, along with their request for advance appropriations for FY18. VA's homeless programs are funded through the medical care accounts, which receive advance appropriations. We all know that veteran homelessness has decreased 36% since 2010. And in January 2015, about 48,000 veterans were homeless. Since then, many communities have reached the goal of ending veteran homelessness because we know what strategies work, we're investing in them, and communities are actually working together to implement these solutions. And we can see from this budget request that the Obama administration continues to be committed to working toward ending veteran homelessness in more communities. As we dive down into the numbers, we can see that the President's FY17 budget request includes $1.6 billion for programs to assist homeless veterans. This is about a $200 million increase over the FY17 advance appropriation. More specifically, the budget proposes funding for several different programs. I'm going to just stick to the three biggest ones because these are the ones that have made the most impact on our ability to end veteran homelessness. So the first program I'd like to touch on is HUD-VASH, which, as you know, is a collaboration between HUD and VA. The budget on the VA side includes $496 million for case management and supportive services. This is funding that would go towards case managers and clinical positions like nurses, mental health professionals, but it would also go towards non-clinical staff, including peer support, employment, and housing specialists to work on housing stability for some of the most vulnerable homeless veterans. In addition, the budget request includes $300 million for the SSBF program. This program provides rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention for veterans and families, and it served just over 157,000 people in 2015. So we can see that this funding will continue to make a huge impact on communities' abilities to end veteran homelessness. Finally, I'd like to touch on the Grant and Per Diem program. The budget request includes $247 million for the Grant and Per Diem program, which provides transitional housing for homeless veterans. I guess I can turn this back over to Steve to sort of touch on the budget and policy outlook for this year.
All right, great. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, everybody else. So now we're going to go from the part of this webinar that's about describing what's in the budget to the part that talks about what we can do to make some of these great things happen. As I said at the beginning, many of the most eye-catching proposals are these mandatory spending proposals that will require whole new legislation to put into effect. We, along with a lot of other people, are busy right now putting together a strategy to make some of these things happen, or to try to make some of these things happen. We'll have that put together over the coming weeks. We hope people will stay tuned for that. But let me put out one thing to people right now, since there's almost 200 people on this call. One thing is, if we're going to introduce legislation to do an $11 billion program, we'll need a member of Congress who's willing to introduce that legislation. If I'm asking everybody who's on this call, if you think your member of the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate is so committed to homelessness that he or she would want to be a sponsor of this legislation, please email us and let us know. And then we will get back to you about what you can do to help make that happen. So that's the mandatory side. What is definitely moving ahead, however, is the appropriations legislation for the discretionary programs, the same programs that we advocate for year after year that require a fight every year to get funding, and this year is going to be no different. In fact, there's several reasons why this year might require a more intense level of fight. A couple of budget context things. The overall spending for discretionary spending is basically the same as last year. It was a 2-year budget deal. There was a modest increase in the overall limit last year, and then this year stays about the same. You've heard the term NDD that you see on the slide. That's non-defense discretionary. So there's one number for defense programs, another number for non-defense programs, and HUD programs are, of course, in the non-defense category. The overall level is the same as last year. Meanwhile, several programs at HUD, as I mentioned before, need increases in spending in order to maintain their programs at existing levels. Rents are going up. Programs like the Section 8 tenant-based voucher program are based on the rental market, so when rents go up, the government has to pay more money to keep the same number of people housed, and there is a good deal of increase requested in the HUD budget just to do that. A similar thing happens with the homeless programs, many of which are based on fair market rents, and when those go up, you need more money to house the same number of people. The FHA receipts, this is like getting really wonky, but let's just say, I'd sum it up by saying HUD basically runs a mortgage insurance business, and when that business makes money, that money is available to fund HUD programs. The administration's budget assumed that the profits from that mortgage insurance business would go up a lot in 2017. Sorry, that slide says 2016 on the top. It should be 2017, but it relates to 2016 and 2017. Anyway, the office in Congress that predicts what will happen with FHA receipts, we think is probably going to say that FHA receipts will actually go down a little bit. So that means another big hole in the budget. The upshot of this technical detail, which people can learn more about by giving us an email, and we'll talk about it more. But the upshot is that this is going to be a very tight year for appropriations. It's going to take a lot of work to keep programs funded at their current capacity, and if we want more spending as the budget proposes, we're going to have to be on our game. We're going to have to be doing our best. We're going to have to really get the word across that housing is a priority, and within housing, homelessness programs are a top priority. Now, fortunately, You can go to the next slide. Fortunately, we've been doing that for a number of years. This community of people, the people who work with the Alliance on advocacy about funding levels for homeless programs, have proven to be very effective over the years. We've got some things going for us. We have programs that work. The commitment through the HEARTH Act of people who use homeless programs to hold themselves accountable for performing, for getting good outcomes, for housing a lot of homeless people with the money. That's a big selling point in Congress, and it's one that's helped us improve our funding over the years, and it's getting better and better. So again, that's credit to the work of all the people in the field who are doing this work. We're dealing with a very vulnerable population. I don't think there's any doubt about whether people who are homeless really need help. A lot of the discussion about poverty issues is about, like, well, they don't really need help. But I think people, by the time they're homeless, I think the majority of Americans, certainly, and even the majority of people in Congress, understand that that's the case. And for those reasons, we have a history of bipartisan support for these programs. We've got a Democratic administration making proposals and a Republican-led Congress enacting what gets enacted, and that's usually, as people who read the papers about what's going on in Washington know, that is usually a recipe for a lot of dysfunction and a lot of not things happening. However, on the issue of homelessness, things have happened, and it's because there's a history of bipartisan support for these programs. Okay, and then there's one other big thing we've got going for us. And that's you. That's the people on this call, the people who are the advocates for these programs. The things you all are bringing to the table, you're experts in how things work at the local level. Your member of Congress might be hearing, oh, the homeless programs work, but they might be wondering why they work. You know why they work. It's because of the work you do in the communities. People are building relationships. A relationship with a congressional office is something that gets built over a long time by inviting staff people, inviting the member of Congress to come see programs, by showing up at events that they run back in the district, by coming to our conference or coming to DC for other reasons and going in to visit, by being someone they can call on for information about what's going on. And finally, of course, people who work on homelessness are just people who care a lot about making this stuff work. And part of making it work is getting enough funding to do what you need to do at the level you do it. So let me just take this opportunity once again to thank the people who are on this call and all the people you work with to do this advocacy. And then let me turn it back over to Julie to give you a few details about what our campaign for this funding is going to look like this year.
Thank you, Steve. So as Steve said, a large component of our work at the Alliance is working with our partners across the country to impact federal policy priorities around preventing and ending homelessness. And we send out a number of specific updates to different listservs and newsletters to work with our advocates to make their advocacy efforts easier, basically to keep them looped in on what's happening in DC and different proposals that will impact people experiencing homelessness. And the critical points in that really complicated spending process that I went through earlier that will make the most impact if advocates step in to make action. So since we're a bit short on time, I'm going to skip over a bit of the kind of general advocacy information, but there's plenty of information on the advocacy page of our website, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Just as a reminder of what we'll be working on this year, we really need to capitalize on this year being the last year of the Obama administration. We don't know what we'll have next, and we have been so fortunate that this administration has made ending homelessness a high priority and need to make sure that we really build on the administration's proposal this year in our advocacy work with Congress. So again, for kind of the key things that you'll be hearing about from us through our various advocacy campaigns, we are going to, especially through our FY 2017 homelessness funding campaign, be working a lot on securing the $2.664 billion for McKinney-Vento homeless assistance grants that has been discussed to really increase our capacity to end chronic homelessness and make progress on ending family and youth homelessness as well. So that is one key thing, probably the biggest priority that we're going to be pushing this year. Like Steve said, you know, spending is going to be really tight on the discretionary side, and just to maintain existing capacity in the McKinney programs will be hard work. We've shown that, you know, we can do it. Last year we even got increases, but we really need it to be an all hands on deck effort. So that will be our really big push that we're going to be getting started on right away. We will also be supporting our partners' efforts in advocating for increased funding for the Section 8 program, particularly the vouchers targeted to homeless families. So that will be something else I'm sure you'll be hearing from us about at different points over the course of the year as well. And finally, as always, we'll be advocating for increased overall HUD spending, and we actually have an opportunity for you to get involved with that right now, and that we will be sending out after this webinar due to limited time. All right, so just to make sure that we, like Steve did earlier, make the best use of the time of having all of you on the phone. We are going to launch some polls shortly. You might have noticed we've already kind of soft launched our FY 2017 homelessness funding campaign. It has a web page. If you sign up for our FY 2017 homelessness funding list, which you're about to have the chance to do, you will have opportunities throughout the year to get involved with meeting your members of Congress, hosting site visits of your programs for your members, many opportunities to call and send letters to congressional offices, and we really would love your help throughout the year and hope you will consider joining our efforts to advocate for the most vulnerable members of our society. So with that, we are going to launch a few polls now. One will let you become involved in that effort, and another will, okay, and so that one is being launched right now. So that again is really for folks who are really passionate about the homelessness side, in particular the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grants Program. That is the key focus of this campaign, although you might hear of other proposals impacting people experiencing homelessness as well through this mailing list. Great, thank you so many of you for participating. We also have one more poll to launch. This is two more polls to launch. The next is for our advocacy update newsletters. This is for a broader array of programs, not as specific to the McKinney-Vento homeless assistance programs. For anyone who wants to hear about opportunities to take action to impact policies that would help homeless, not only just homeless families, but also youth, veterans, et cetera. It will, non-chronic single adults, it really will just give you any advocacy opportunities across the board to help homeless populations. So these come less often and they're shorter, so please sign up if you are at all interested in getting this overview. And while you're deciding if you want to sign up, if you're not sure yet whether you want to join our efforts, but you change your mind later, or if you have any questions, you can always email me at jklein@naeh.org. So we are very much looking forward to this work together. Okay, sorry, one moment. We are going to launch one more poll, and I apologize that we are over time. And this is just a general poll. Has this webinar been helpful to you or not? So I'm going to keep talking as you fill out your responses. And if you, like I said, are not sure if you want to join, you can email me. We really want to grow our base of advocates participating in this campaign to send as strong of a message as possible that ending homelessness is important to members' constituents and needs to be a priority. So please let's work together to fight the uphill battle this year, as we were so successful in doing last year, and really make gains toward ending homelessness. Please spread the word about all of these email lists, this advocacy update opportunity, and also the webinar with colleagues who might want to be involved as we go forward. With that, I am going to turn this back over to Jamie to really quickly just close the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Julie. As a reminder, we will be sending out PowerPoint slides and other materials from this webinar very shortly. We will also post a recording of the webinar as soon as possible on our website at www.endhomelessness.org. Also, I just want to note that the corrected youth numbers will be posted in the slides on our website, and if you are interested in that, you can currently go to our budget chart where they are correct on our website and in the budget rundown. We do apologize for having the wrong numbers in the PowerPoint. I think we're going to wrap up at this point, but if you have any further questions regarding the content of this webinar, please, again, don't hesitate to email them to myself or to Julie. And thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.